Jacob was a solitary security guard living a quiet life near Silver Creek River. One afternoon, as rain poured down, he spotted a young boy struggling in the river's fierce current. Without hesitation, Jacob dove in, saving the boy's life. It was a brave act, done without thought of reward. But what Jacob didn't know was that the boy carried a secret that would unravel Jacob's forgotten past and lead him back to a life he thought he had lost forever. The world had become a blur of routine for Jacob Carter. For as long as he could remember, which wasn't much, he had worked as a security guard near the Silver Creek River, patrolling trails, shooing off trespassers, and locking gates. People in the quiet, rugged town knew him as a solitary man, quiet but reliable. What they didn't know was that Jacob himself had no idea who he truly was. 10 years ago, he woke up battered and confused, his head splitting with pain, lying by a riverbank miles away from anyone who might know him. No name, no past, no identity, just flashes, fragmented images that came unbidden like broken shards of glass in his mind. A woman's laugh, the roar of an explosion, the smell of smoke. The memories came in waves, unpredictable and cruel. A helicopter overhead made his chest tighten. The sharp crack of a twig underfoot sent his heart racing as though it were the sound of a rifle. When these moments came, they brought agony, a piercing pain in his temples that forced him to his knees. The first few years, Jacob tried to fight it, to grasp at the fleeting memories, but the harder he pushed, the sharper the pain became. Eventually, he stopped trying. He buried the flashes of his past deep within himself, locking them away like they were a part of someone else's life. Whoever Jacob Carter used to be no longer mattered. All that mattered was surviving each day. So Jacob had learned to live in the present. His life revolved around routines, walking the trails, checking the locks, and staring at the vast, unyielding forest that surrounded him. The townsfolk liked him well enough, but Jacob never let them get too close. They were kind, offering small talk, invitations to dinner, but he always declined with a polite nod. People carried questions, and Jacob had no answers. He had built his world around the forest, and in some ways it became his companion. But some nights, as he sat by the riverbank staring at the moon's reflection, the emptiness felt unbearable. He'd run his fingers over the scar at the base of his skull, a jagged line he couldn't remember earning, and wonder if the answer to his life lay just out of reach, hidden behind that veil of lost time. For a man without a past, time moved strangely. It stretched endlessly, like he was caught in a loop that would never break. And then, one fateful afternoon, Jacob heard the scream, high-pitched, desperate, and coming from the river. In that instant, everything changed. He stopped in his track, his eyes scanning the tree line along the Silver Creek River. The scream came again, fainter now, but filled with panic. Jacob sprinted toward the riverbank, his gaze locking on a boy, no older than 10, flailing helplessly in the churning water. The river's current was fierce, swollen from recent rains, and the boy was being carried farther downstream, his arms thrashing as he fought to stay afloat. Jacob didn't think. His body moved on instinct, the kind of reflex that had once been second nature but now felt almost foreign. Shedding his jacket and boots in one swift motion, he dove into the icy water, the cold hitting him like a wall of knives. The river roared around him, pulling him under, slamming his body against unseen rocks, but he pushed forward. "Hold on," Jacob shouted, his voice swallowed by the rushing water. The child's face was pale, his eyes wide with terror, but Jacob reached him, locking a strong arm around his small frame. The current was unrelenting, dragging them both downstream. Jacob gritted his teeth, his focus narrowing to survival. The boy clung to him, his fingers gripping Jacob's arm like a lifeline. Jacob spotted an outcrop of jagged rocks jutting from the riverbank ahead and kicked with all his strength, using the last reserves of his energy to push them toward it. With a final desperate effort, Jacob hauled them both out of the water, collapsing onto the muddy bank. His chest heaved as he gulped in air, his limbs shaking from exhaustion and cold. The boy lay beside him, coughing violently, water dripping from his soaked clothes. "You're safe now, kid," Jacob rasped. He pushed himself up enough to sit, shaking the water from his hair. The boy shivered, clutching his knees to his chest as he looked at Jacob with wide, frightened eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. I thought I was going to die. Jacob nodded. His gaze lingered on the boy, noting the fear in his eyes and the cuts on his arms. He frowned, his tone steady but probing. How did you end up in that river, kid? What happened? The boy hesitated, his lips quivering as he avoided Jacob's piercing gaze. Finally, he looked up, glancing toward the forest with a fearful expression. I was running, he admitted. I didn't mean to fall in. I slipped. Jacob's brow furrowed. Running from what? The boy hugged his knees tighter, as if trying to shrink into himself. There were these men, he said. They grabbed me, and I got away. But I think they're still out there. Jacob straightened, his eyes scanning the tree line, suddenly alert. Men? He pressed. What men? Who are they? I don't know, the boy whispered, his voice barely audible. But they said I couldn't leave, that if I tried, they'd... He trailed off, his words choking in his throat. Jacob's jaw tightened, his hand balling into a fist. He crouched down, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. Listen to me, he said. You're safe with me now. No one's going to hurt you. But I need you to tell me everything, okay? The boy nodded hesitantly, his eyes filling with tears. I didn't mean to make them mad. I just wanted to find my mom. She brought me here. We were looking for someone. Jacob blinked, the boy's words cutting through his mind like a knife. Looking for someone? Who? The boy sniffled, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. My dad, he said softly. She said he might be here. Jacob's breath caught. Something in the boy's voice, his determination, his vulnerability, stirred a deep, inexplicable ache in Jacob's chest. Let's get moving, Jacob said finally, standing and extending a hand. We'll talk more when we're safe. The boy reached up, his small hand gripping Jacob's tightly. As they made their way into the forest, Jacob felt the weight of something he couldn't name pressing down on him. The boy's story wasn't over, and neither, he realized, was his own. The river had carried them far from the town, deep into the heart of the forest. Towering trees loomed over them. The air was damp and heavy, filled with the scent of moss and decaying leaves. The forest was alive with the sounds of rustling leaves, distant animal cries, and the occasional snap of a branch. Jacob crouched near a small fire he'd managed to start. The boy sat close, wrapped in Jacob's coat, shivering despite the warmth of the flames. What's your name, kid? Jacob asked, breaking the silence as he poked the fire with a stick. Danny, the boy said. Danny Carter? Jacob's hand froze mid-motion. The name echoed in his mind. He nodded, pushing the feeling aside. What happened, Danny? How'd you end up in that river? Bad men. Danny hesitated, but said finally, they grabbed me, but I ran. I thought I could get away, but I fell into the river. Jacob frowned, his eyes narrowing. Bad men? Why were they after you? I don't know. They didn't say. I didn't want to stay with them. I thought maybe if I ran, I could find my mom. Jacob rubbed his temples, trying to suppress the dull ache building behind his eyes. He glanced at the boy, at his small, trembling form, and something inside him twisted. You'll find her, Jacob said quietly. But right now, you stick with me. We'll get out of here. Danny nodded, his wide eyes reflecting both trust and fear. As they trekked through the forest, Jacob began to notice strange markings on the trees, symbols carved into the bark. They were old and weathered, but they stirred something deep in his mind. He reached out to touch one, and his vision blurred. Suddenly, he was in another time. Soldiers moved silently through the forest, their faces grim. Jacob recognized their uniforms, his own, though the realization felt distant, like he was watching someone else's memories. Jacob, stay sharp, a voice shouted. He turned to see a comrade's face, but the memory shattered before he could grasp it fully. Danny's voice pulled him back. Do you know what those are? Jacob stared at the symbols, his hand trembling. I think I've seen them before. Danny stared at him, his small face filled with confusion and a hint of fear. Do you think those men made it? Jacob didn't answer. His instincts told him there was more to this place than he understood, but for now, he had one goal, keeping Danny safe. Come on, Jacob said, his voice firm. We need to keep moving. Danny nodded, following close behind. But as they walked deeper into the forest, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just trying to escape. He was being pulled towards something he couldn't yet remember, but was certain he wasn't ready to face. As they pushed deeper into the forest, they stumbled into a clearing. A small fire burned at its center, surrounded by 3 men, rough, dangerous-looking, and armed. Danny gasped, gripping Jacob's arm. That's them, Danny whispered. The ones who took me. The men noticed them immediately. Well, look who decided to show up, the leader said as he stepped forward, his lips curling into a sneer. Stay behind me, Jacob murmured to Danny. The leader's eyes narrowed as he studied Jacob. Wait a minute. I know you." His voice tinged with a mix of recognition and disbelief. Jacob's head throbbed violently. Flashes of memory collided with the present. "You're supposed to be dead," the leader's voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. His hand flexed over the knife at his belt. "Yeah," the leader continued, stepping closer, his movements slow and deliberate. "You're the one, aren't you, Carter? You and your team thought you could take us down. How'd that work out for you?" Jacob staggered back, gripping his head as flashes of his team filled his mind. Men moving through the forest with precision, their faces focused but wary. He saw their eyes widen in fear, heard the deafening sound of explosions, the screams. Then came the silence, the heavy, suffocating silence of failure. "What did you do?" Jacob muttered, his voice low, almost a growl. "What did I do?" the leader echoed with a cruel laugh. "You mean, what did we do? We ended your little mission, Carter. You and your squad walked right into our trap. You think you were the first to come for us? We've been at this a long time, and let me tell you, watching your precious team fall apart, it was a work of art." Jacob's heart pounded, his breath coming in sharp, ragged bursts. The fragmented memories began to stitch themselves together, his team pinned down by gunfire, the panicked calls for backup, the overwhelming force that ambushed them, and then the explosion, the blinding light, the searing heat, and the weightlessness as everything went dark. "You killed them." His eyes burned as he stared the man down, the memories now vivid and undeniable. "You killed my team," the leader shrugged, his smirk widening. "Yeah, and you should have gone with them. Guess we didn't finish the job. But hey, I can fix that." With a sharp motion, the leader drew his knife and lunged, his movements quick and calculated. But Jacob was faster. His instincts, sharpened by years of training, buried deep within him, took over. He sidestepped the attack, grabbing the leader's wrist and twisting it hard. The knife clattered to the ground, and Jacob followed through with a powerful strike to the man's ribs, sending him staggering backward. "You're not going to get another chance." The leader laughed even as he winced in pain. "Look at you, still fighting like the soldier you don't even remember being. But this isn't over, Carter. It never was." Jacob's fist shot out, striking the man hard across the jaw and silencing him. The leader crumpled to the ground, unconscious, his body sprawled in the dirt. Breathing heavily, Jacob straightened, his fists still clenched, blood dripping from his knuckles. He turned his gaze to the other two men who hesitated, their bravado slipping away with every second. The leader lay crumpled on the ground, unconscious, his cruel smirk replaced by slack-jawed silence. "You want to try your luck?" Jacob asked, his voice low, sharp, and deadly. The men exchanged nervous glances. One of them, a wiry man with a scar across his cheek, took a step back, his confidence crumbling. Without another word, the two men turned and bolted into the trees, their retreat clumsy and panicked. Jacob watched them go, his breathing still ragged, his instincts telling him not to let his guard down. As the sound of their retreating footsteps faded, one of them shouted over his shoulder, "You're dead, Carter. Our boss will hear about this. You're a walking corpse." Jacob didn't flinch, but something inside him shifted, a cold, sinking realization that this fight wasn't over. These men weren't the ones he needed to fear. They were pawns, disposable and unimportant, following orders from someone far more dangerous. Jacob glanced at the unconscious leader, sprawled near the fire, his expression hardening. The man was ordinary, just another thug playing at power. The real threat, Jacob knew, was whoever was behind these men, the one pulling the strings. "Jacob?" Danny's small voice broke through the tension. Jacob turned, his hardened expression softening slightly as he saw the boy peeking out from behind a tree, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. "Is it over?" "For now," Jacob said, rising to his feet. He walked over to Danny, placing a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "But we need to move. They'll come back. And next time, they won't come alone." He led Danny away from the clearing, his mind working furiously. Whoever these men were, they thought they had erased him a decade ago. They believed he was dead, just like the rest of his team. But now they knew the truth. Jacob Carter was alive, and he wasn't going to stop until he uncovered why his team had been killed and what they had been trying to protect. Jacob and Danny moved quickly, the forest around them darkening as the sun dipped lower in the sky. Jacob's steps were deliberate, his focus razor-sharp, scanning the terrain ahead for any sign of danger. But despite his determination, his thoughts churned restlessly. The name Carter screamed in his mind, echoing alongside the fragmented images of his past, the mission, his team, the betrayal. He tried to push it aside, focusing instead on the boy walking just behind him. "Jacob?" Danny hesitated, looking at the ground ground as he walked. You said your name's Jacob Carter, right? Jacob slowed, turning to face Danny fully. The boy's expression was cautious, his wide eyes searching Jacob's face for answers he wasn't sure he had. That's what I've been told, Jacob replied carefully. Why? Danny swallowed hard, his voice trembling. That's my dad's name. He was a soldier, too. The words hit Jacob like a punch to the gut. His chest tightened, and for a moment he forgot how to breathe. Your dad, Jacob said, his voice quiet but firm. He was a soldier? Danny nodded. Yeah, my mom said he was really brave. She told me he went away on a mission, but he never came back. His voice faltered. She said he was gone, but we came to this town because she thought maybe he wasn't. Jacob's mind reeled. The boy's words felt like puzzle pieces clicking into place, but the picture they formed was still incomplete. He knelt down, meeting Danny's gaze. Danny, he said gently, your mom, what's her name? Emily, Danny said softly. Emily Carter. The name tore through Jacob like a lightning bolt. Flashes of a woman's face, her laugh, her voice calling his name filled his mind. His chest heaved as the memories came in fragmented bursts, overlapping with the pain of loss he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. I don't remember everything, Jacob admitted, his voice trembling, but I think I know her. I think I know you. Danny's eyes lit up, tears brimming as he stepped closer. You're my dad, aren't you? He whispered, hope and disbelief mingling in his voice, and Jacob wanted to say yes, to give the boy the answer he so clearly wanted, but the words wouldn't come. Not yet. Let's get out of here, Jacob said instead, his voice steadier now. Your mom will know for sure. After what felt like hours, the forest began to thin. The sound of distant voices reached Jacob's ears, faint but unmistakable. He quickened his pace, Danny keeping close behind. They emerged from the trees into a clearing where a small ranger station stood. Emily stood just outside the station, her arms wrapped around herself as she paced back and forth. Her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She had been waiting for hours, hope and dread warring within her as she prayed for her son's safe return. Mom! Danny's voice rang out, breaking the stillness. When she saw him, she let out a choked sob, running toward him with open arms. Danny, she cried, dropping to her knees as he barreled into her embrace. She held him tightly, her tears soaking into his hair. Oh my God, Danny, you're safe. Danny clung to her, his voice muffled against her shoulder. I'm okay, Mom, I'm okay. Jacob saved me. At the mention of the name, Emily looked up, her eyes locking onto the man standing a few feet away. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment the world seemed to stand still. Jacob, she whispered, her voice trembling. Jacob stepped forward, his expression unreadable, his heart pounding in his chest. Emily, he said, his voice breaking as her name passed his lips. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she rose to her feet, her hands trembling as they reached for him. Is it really you? Her voice cracking with emotion. I thought you were gone. Jacob nodded, his own eyes misting. I thought I was too. Emily let out a shuddering breath, closing the distance between them. She threw her arms around him, holding him as though afraid he might disappear again. Jacob hesitated, his body stiff, but then his arms came up to wrap around her, pulling her close. I searched for you, Emily said through her sobs. For years I searched. I never gave up. I knew you were out there. I knew it. Jacob's throat tightened, his mind still reeling from the realization of who she was, of who he was. I couldn't remember, he admitted, his voice low. I didn't know how to find you. Emily pulled back slightly, her hands cupping his face, her eyes searching his. It doesn't matter, she said. You're here now. That's all that matters. Danny stepped closer, looking up at both of them. So, is he really my dad? He asked, his voice quiet but filled with hope. Emily smiled through her tears, nodding as she looked at Jacob. Yes, she said softly. He's your dad. Jacob dropped to one knee, his hands resting on Danny's shoulders. I'm sorry I wasn't there, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Danny threw his arms around him, and Jacob held him tightly, the weight of his past and the promise of his future colliding in that moment. As the three of them embraced, the warmth of their reunion was interrupted by the faint sound of tires crunching gravel in the distance. Jacob's instincts flared, his body tensing as he looked toward the sound. Emily noticed his shift, her smile fading. What is it? Jacob's expression darkened. They're coming, he said, his voice low and steady. The ones who took Danny, they know I'm alive. Emily's face paled, fear flashing in her eyes. What do we do? Jacob stood, his gaze hard as steel. We run, he said, but not forever. This ends now. And with that, Jacob took their hands, leading them away from the station and into the night, where the shadows of his past waited to collide with the man he had become.